Hey guys, welcome back to Ready Set Script, and today we're going to be talking about scripting basics in Roblox. This is basically a basis for all the things you need to know if you're just starting out, and let's get right into the video. Alright guys, so first of all, the programming language that is used for scripting in Roblox is called Lua. You may have known that or you may have not already, but it's also good to know that in case you need to search anything up on the syntax, and there's also things out there that you can find that'll help you code better. And if you're having an error, you can troubleshoot it pretty easily just by knowing the name and then googling what the issue is. It's good to know that Roblox does have documentation for references and examples and how-tos with coding in Roblox or scripting with the Lua programming language. So use that as a free resource. The link is right here. You can also Google it, but it's pretty helpful if you're just starting out. And even developers that are more experienced still use the documentation because that's the source of truth for where you get all this information. It's also important to know that Lua is not exclusive to Roblox. There's other things that it's used for in software development, such as embedded systems, web server scripting, automation, and lots of other things. I'm not familiar with using Lua outside of Roblox, specifically for Roblox, but I do use other programming languages in software engineering, and I'm pretty familiar with those. But it's important to know that there's other applications of learning this programming language if you need to use it for a scale in the future, or if you want to transfer that knowledge of programming to another language. Usually you can learn one programming language and a lot of the things are similar in the other. So for example, Lua is pretty similar to Python in the case that it's a dynamically typed programming language, and we'll get into that more in the future. But that's just an example of how transferable that knowledge is, and it doesn't have to just be exclusively to Roblox. So I'm talking a lot about programming languages, but if you don't know what a programming language is, that's okay. But here's a basic understanding for it. It's typically a set of symbols, keywords, and syntax. Usually is like English. That's easily readable by us humans, and we use it as instructions for the computer. So it's like a set of instructions and the computer just follows that. Typically it's not literally this though. The computer is not going to be reading like you do as a human, unless it's like a language modeled artificial intelligence or something like that. But even as that, it's probably not generated literally as these letters. Typically, when you run a piece of code, it's compiled or translated into machine code, and that's where those ones and zeros come up. You've heard a lot in ones and zeros of programming. That's where they apply. Software engineers aren't just, well, I hope software engineers aren't just looking at all these ones and zeros saying, okay, this needs to be here. No, that's not how that works. Computers like it like that, but we prefer it in English. It's much easier to read, and you need a lot less information as well. But the computer is pretty fast. It likes to read all of this in one go, straight up. But we write it as programming language of the instructions. It gets compiled as these ones and zeros. Computer reads that. Everyone's happy. Bada boom, bada bing. Computer does the instructions. So the common thing that you need to understand in most programming languages are variables, loops, if-else statements, arrays, and functions. Those are the main things. There are probably infinite, but these are the main things that are common in most programming languages. We'll go into these more in the future, maybe in future videos. But the main thing right now for this video, at least, is variables. And we initialize it. There's something called initialization, where you call it, or I think it's called instantiation. I'm not quite sure. You call it and you put local in front of it in Roblox Lua at least, and that's basically saying like, hey, we want to make sure this gets initiated, and this is a real thing. I think the definition for it is that it exists only in the script. So other scripts can call their own variables with this name, but I think the local part means that this variable is only going to persist in this script. I usually always do local, and I see a lot of people do it. At this point, I feel like it's just everyone does it, so go ahead and do that. But if I were you, I'd maybe look for a definition if you can't remember. but usually it's okay to just do local before you start a variable. Data structures and algorithms are also something you can look into if you're interested in the infinite amounts of things you can do with programming languages. And there are ways you can make things faster with code, and that's why these data structures and algorithms exist. And you can also improve your own code just by knowing this stuff, because a lot of people spend their lives and lots of money on research just to figure out what's the fastest possible way to do this. Ignore these ads. But yeah, like they want to know what's the fast way to do this, and that's why a lot of these things are invented. In a lot of programming languages, these data structures already exist built in within the programming language for you to easily use, just because they want you to use that programming language and have faster code in the long run. These are also some things that are taught in college when you study computer science. It's not important now, but this is stuff that like a lot of people research, and it's also important to know when you do go into that job of software engineering, because they want you to be able to do stuff effectively. For example, if I were to use this loop right here, as opposed to this if-else statement, or as opposed to this function, I'm running this loop is going to run like 10 times, whereas this runs once, but this loop is triggering something 10 times. And we'll get into that in the future, but there's certain things and best practices for you to consider when you're making something that you want to run very reliably. There's also data types, and that's something you may want to be interested in, because in most other languages, it's important to specify whether the piece of information that you're working with is, for example, a whole number, a number with decimal, a character, in a string, like just a letter, or their symbols that's on your keyboard, but just one of them, or whether or not it's a string, or whether or not it's a true or false statement, which is basically 0 or 1. But in Lua, it's a Boolean, and it's literally going to be saying either true or false, nothing else. It's not a string, just as true or false. Yeah, in other languages, you wouldn't be saying stuff like local, or I'm not sure, but for example, like in Java, you would call it int, short for integer, which means whole number. It's gonna be underlined here because Lua, the compiler that they use for Roblox is specifically only for Lua. So it's gonna error out here, but in for example, like Java, you'd say int and then start amount and stuff like that. So, but luckily for us, we don't need to do that here because you can just say local. And like I was saying, yeah, luckily for us, Lua doesn't care about those data types, and that's very similar to Python, like I said. And they're called a dynamically typed programming language. And that's what that means is after you instantiate it as a data type, you can use it as another data type. So right here, it's a string. You can use it as an integer if you want to later in the program. And you don't need to specify what data type it is before you use it. Like I said, you could just say local and then instantiate it. But in other languages like Java, you would need to use int, string in this case. And you wouldn't be able, like I said, you wouldn't be able to switch this to an integer. You can make another variable and set it to an integer, but if it's already set as a string or another data type, you can't do that. You can use casting, you can look into that, but it also takes in more consideration. But there's more versatility in those dynamic type programming languages. Not that they're better, just it's easier to make mistakes that way, or easier to use less variables that way in those dynamic type programming languages like Lua and Python. So let's go ahead and test that out. I'm gonna click play, and here's my character. Let's do a little dancey dance so you guys don't get distracted. And let's look at the output. You press view and then click output at the top. And if you want to keep this tab up, you can just double click it. Not double clap, sorry. And then you can look at the output and see what script is outputting with the print statements and what it's saying. So that's pretty helpful. As you can see, it says hello, and then it says 1, 2, 3, 4. So it compiled and it worked. Additionally, if you own the game, you can also go into the game and press F9, and it'll show you what's outputting there. It shows you what's outputting from the server, at least, not from other clients. And we can talk about that more in the future. But it's pretty useful if you're playing in game and just want to see what's going on. If there's an error or there's being outputted, or you can even run commands here. You can script here. But we can talk about that more in the future. Also, just so you guys know, these scripts that I have here, the name, you can name it whatever you want. I just have it named like this so I can remember. And I typically put it in the server script service just so it's more organized. It can still work within workspace, but it's more organized to do this. Or you can even make a folder and put it in there, and it'll run just the same. So that's pretty good to know. Anyways, so enough about software engineering stuff, unless you're a nerd like me, but let's get right into the basics. So let's go to the server script service and let's click insert object, and we're gonna click script. As you can see, it says I frequently use it. So we're gonna click script. There's also local script, which we don't necessarily want to use right now on the server. We want to use a script. It used to be called server script. Let's see if it still does. No, it just says script, but it runs on the server if it's just a plain old script, and we can explain that eventually. All right, so Lua and probably all programming languages are written just as you were to write an essay in the English language, from top to bottom and then from left to right. Okay, and this is also called sequential execution in programming. So that's just basically how the compiler is going to read it and how it's going to be giving it to the computer. But also, it's important to know that you need to do this in the order you want it. So how can I explain this? So you want to run it in the order you want it to happen in, because you want to also assume that the computer knows nothing. It has no prior knowledge. It has no thinking at all. It's fast, but it does not know what you want. It's not a mind reader. You got to tell it exactly what you want. If you don't already have like an asset ready or an object already made, which is sometimes easier, some people do. But if you want something to be exactly what you want it to do, or or to wait a couple seconds, like if you want it to wait 2 seconds before doing something, you have to let it to know that. And usually it's just gonna run automatically all at once. Like it's not all at once. It runs from top to bottom, but it's just so fast. That's the beauty of computers. They're so fast you don't know. But it seems like they're running all at once, but that's not really true. They're running very quickly, but one line at a time. So for this example, if let's say you want a block, right, and you want it to receive a color. Before you tell it what color you want, right here we have it as black data type, or I don't know what it's called in Roblox, but you'd use a color 3. You want to set it to this color, black. Oh, sorry, I think there's a way for it to show me which color it is. I don't know why it's not. There we go. That's a preview. You can click it, and then you can even click whatever color you want. But you got to be specific. That's the thing. Even down to whatever shade it is, But let's say you want it to be a color. You want to make sure that the block exists in the first place, and you want to make sure that it is in the workspace, which means that it's in the game and visible to everyone, or just visible in general. That it's in the workspace where all the physics happens. And you want to make sure it's also in the right position. Sorry, that's the size. Well, right size too, but also in the right position. So you really want to make sure you're as specific as possible and in the order you want. And here I make it can collided. So that means we want to make sure you can't walk right through it. Want to make sure it's anchored, so it's not going to be moving. So this is just more examples of how specific you really want it. Let's go ahead and run this. All right, so here we have our block. It's so as you can see, if we open the workspace, not the player, sorry, you can see that's the part. See, we didn't even name it. It just says part. So even if you wanted to have a name, you got to be that specific. But we have it as part. And what else do we have here? With the size 555. Oh yeah, as you can see, parents is workspace. So we set the parent as a property, but that means it's underneath workspace. The workspace is basically the world. Size, here we have it here. 555 XYZ, and this is the X position. It gives the hint XYZ. The position. Let's look at the position, which is in C frame 222. Color 000. All of that stuff. We specifically ordered that. So it's also important for me to note that these are just properties. So I didn't really give the right explanation for why it's in the order you want. The properties, when you're setting them, they don't really matter. The order, at least. You can go ahead and make them be like this. You can move something else to the top. The properties don't really matter and even if it's not in the workspace, you can go ahead and still set it to whatever property you want. Right. That I wanted to make sure I was clear on that. It being initialized, yes, that needs to be done first. Like if I take that away, these start to be underlined because the code is like, dude, where is this? We don't know what you're talking about here. But if I make sure it's initialized first, I can go ahead and do that. And even if I didn't specify a workspace, let's go ahead and take that away. It still exists somewhere. It's just not in the game because we didn't specify a parent. It exists within the script, but we didn't specify a parent, therefore it can't be anywhere. So for something to exist, it needs a parent. For example, workspace, even workspace has a parent, right? The parent is the name of my game here, but the parent is literally the game. We can't see it because you're not gonna really want to mess with the overall game name or the game object, game object. But even the workspace has a parent. Everything needs a parent. And if you want it to be in the workspace, which is the overall world, you want it to make sure that the parent of that object is the workspace. See the base plate, spawn location is the workspace. So you don't have to put that back. But yeah, these don't matter what order. It may matter what order if you want it to be to wait a while. So if, for example, if you want it to be in that position and you go ahead and say like, wait 2 seconds, no, hold on, wait 10 seconds before you get bigger and before you turn this color, right? Wait 10 seconds, and that's why that order. So let's go ahead and check this out too. If you wanted to have that type of order, yeah, it matters. See, the part exists now. Let's go ahead and wait 10 seconds. Oh, there we go. It got bigger. And it kind of messed with my camera when it spawned in. But that's why that order would matter. But the properties, it doesn't really matter. As long as it exists and you know where you want it to be, and then you know what wait time you want it to do and what things you want to wait after the wait time, stuff like that, okay? It's also important to remind you guys that during this exercise, we're only using the server-side script. So, and that's just to keep the example simple for you guys so you don't have a headache. But we want to go more into it in the future, or I can respond to you guys in the comments. But generally, you should understand that programming in Roblox uses client-side architecture, which means that there's a difference between the server scripts and the server scripts, they can run for everyone. And there's a difference between that and the local scripts that only run for the players. It helps prevent hacking and keeps your game more reliable and faster in runtime, especially for important functions like saving to your data store, banning users immediately, starting and stopping in-game events, etc. The best analogy I can give you right now is that server scripts run on computers or servers that Roblox owns that allows people to play games freely and accessibly through the internet. That's run by Roblox themselves. The local scripts, they run on the current player or each individual player's screen. It basically helps performance because the Roblox servers won't need to do as much if you use a local script. The servers run all the server scripts. The local scripts run the local machines or each player's machine. That way the Roblox servers don't have to get slowed down by doing every single little thing. Sometimes the client can do that themselves. And so that the client is a local side. And also for the local scripts to communicate with the overall game server, you need a remote event. If I just do this and if I insert object, remote event, and we can get into that more in the future, but it's how it can get triggered by a client or local script, and it will then trigger something in the script if you use the right function. That way the client can touch servers. The clients themselves can't really interact with everyone else's screens because then, like if hackers want to run something, now everyone sees it. But this way you can kind of double check with the server to make sure hackers aren't doing something that ruin your game. But we'll get to that in the future. All right, so for the first exercise, we're gonna just make a block from scratch with just code. Specify a location like we saw earlier. Although I had the code there, it's better for me to show you guys how I did that. Okay, so we're gonna click insert object. We're gonna click script, right? And here let's name it exercise 1. And we're gonna delete that. That shows up all the time when you create a script. And we're gonna wanna make this block just straight up from scratch. Okay, so first you want to declare the variable for the block. It can be anything, literally anything. We're gonna name it block, and we're gonna do instance.new, and that's how you kind of instantiate, like I was saying, but instantiating objects built in for Roblox. Like I said, like there's other things and other things that Roblox uses, like parts, fire. Let's go ahead and try it. Look at some of the examples here. Decals, models, mesh parts, animation, pants, humanoid. Some of these stuff you don't even get to see in game, but you can create that with a script. Explosion, trail, beam. And it's also important to know the properties of them as well. So make sure you look at the documentation. But right now, like if you go to insert object, and you search part, that's the basic thing that you need for any part, right? Any 3D asset, it's usually a part. There's a corner wedge part, there's a wedge part, a truss part, mesh part, other parts that have different components that you might want to use. But let's do a basic part, and you can see it here, so you can instantiate it. Instance, you don't need to do that every time, by the way. You can that's just a demonstration of how you can make sure something exists. Instance.new, and then you go and put the parentheses. We're gonna put the quotation marks, and there's player, backpack, all this stuff, but you just want to type part. Usually it gives you suggestions, so it's pretty helpful, and you can press tab to complete that. I don't need to finish the whole thing. See, it wants part, tab, and that finishes it for me. And we want to make this block show up in workspace. So we want it in the game, right? Block dot, yeah, like after I have the local here, I don't need to specify local again because it already exists. Block dot parent is equal to game dot workspace. You could also do just workspace. I think that was a recently new thing in the past couple of years, but I prefer to just do game.workspace. And game, like I said, was the scripting tutorials text that's right here in the parent of workspace. And what else do we want? We want to make sure that all the attributes are where we want it. Do we want to make sure it's in the right position? Yes. And since this is a relatively new game here, the position that's 0.0 is going to be where my spawn location is. You can't see it because I made it invisible. But like, for example, the position for the spawn plate is 0, 0.5, 0. So it's 0, 0, 0 is going to be in this location. We're going to do block.position is equal to game. Well, no, sorry. Block.position is going to be equal to vector3 dot new. And vector3 is just basically, let's look at the definition for that. It just represents a 3D value with the direction and magnitude. But we just want a 3D value for where it is. So vector3.new, 0, comma, I want it a little bit higher. The y-axis is the height in Roblox. So maybe we want it at 10, 0. The reason we need this is because Roblox needs to know the context of what you're specifying. You can't just do equals 0. It doesn't work like that. Those are coordinates, but it needs to know how you want. Is it a vector3? Is it a C frame? Is it a color 3? You know, stuff like that. And you can look at documentation as well. Or ask me questions in the comments and I'll answer. But it needs to know the context. That's the position. All right, so what else do we want to make sure? Do we want it to be stuck in the air? Block dot anchored. That's true. That means it's frozen, so or it's anchored wherever it spawns at. You know, there's other attributes here, like lots of them. If you look at a part, lots of attributes. You can go look at that yourself. We want to make this fun here, so we're gonna make this color like let's make it neon actually, so it looks like a really cool, just weird object. Okay, block dot material equals. I think we can do material. No, material. Enum dot material. So enum means it's enumerated, which means that it kind of exists like permanently. So you can just access it if you don't remember what the property is. Material equals, well, material dot, and we're gonna click neon. Alternatively, we can just do material equals neon, but sometimes it's best practice to do the enumerated access for that. You can look at that more. This is just my preference. What else do we want? We want to make sure it's, maybe we want it to also look like an orb, right? Maybe we can make it look like the sun. Let's think about that. Block dot shape. Okay, so basically shape is going to be, to access it, you're going to do part type, which I don't necessarily like. I wish it was just enum dot shape that ball. That's just my preference. But that's how you would do that. Okay, you can look at the suggestion and it'll tell you, hey, that's how you use it. Shape is equal to enum dot part type dot ball. Okay. There's also block, wedge, cylinder, corner wedge, but we're gonna do ball. Block dot color equals colors 3.new. We're gonna go ahead and select from the options here. We want it to be like this big orange ball. In fact, let's make this taller as well. Let's put it at like 25. Okay. I think that's about it. Let's go ahead and just check it out now. And where is it? It's up in the sky. Let's look. Okay, there it is. Pretty high up, isn't it? Not really. It's just very tiny. Did he specify a shape actually? Go and check that out. Sorry, not shape. Did we specify a size? No, we did not. Okay, let's go and specify a size now. See, that's something you can look at as well. Size is equal to new. And how big do we want it? So it's 25 studs high. Let's make it 20. Right. And we also want to make sure we don't get hit by this thing. We want to walk through it because in case it's like right over my head. Can't collide is equal to false. That way we don't need to touch it. Let's see the description actually. Determines whether a part may collide with other parts. See, you go ahead and look at it that way. You don't need to really necessarily go to the documentation, but here's a link if you do want to. Either or, very good to know though. So go ahead and make sure you use that as a resource. Collide equals false. All right, let's go ahead and run that. Here we go. Right above us, the giant orb. Isn't that so cool? And we can honestly have our camera go right through it because it's can't collide false. So just as a stretch goal, we want to make sure, let's go ahead and make sure that this is like a giant sun. And we're gonna want to copy that and put in lighting to show you an example of how you can just copy something and then reuse it without having to type all this stuff again. I don't want you guys to think that you have to always do stuff like this when you could really just form it out. You can build it if you're good at building. You can form it out and then just copy it into somewhere else and then just use the script to trigger it into the game. Stuff like that. It'll make it a whole lot easier. I like to do that unless it's something that's very simplistic. But let's go ahead and make it a real sun first because I'm not satisfied with how it looks. I want to put it to 100 meters. 100 studs. And let's make the size. Let's make it pretty big. Let's make it 25. Oops. Okay, let's go and try that. All right, now where is it? It is right there. It is giant compared to us. All right, so let's go ahead and copy that actually. If you click here, you can go to the server view, not just the client. Where we are. See, like the server view, you can see what the server is seeing, and there's multiple players in the game. You can see that. Not real players, only if you're in the test mode, but it's pretty useful if there's only a server-side script. If you just play it as regularly, you can also just see the server-side script because you'll still have your regular credentials as a developer of the game, but you can kind of move around as well. So it's kind of character freedom. You can click and drag too. Yeah, see, I can drag my character around. So if you just click this object, right, it has all the properties we set. We're gonna go ahead and right click, copy, and we're gonna end the game. It saves in the clipboard, so I can just go to server storage, right? And we're gonna paste it into. Here I have some other stuff, right, that I moved in there earlier on. I don't necessarily want to delete it, but I'm just putting in server storage so players can't access it. When you start the game up, regular players can't see the server storage. But here I have this part, and I don't want it to just be a regular bland name. I'm gonna name it the sun. Just name it the sun in all caps, right? Now, if we go to our script, we don't need to set these anymore, right? We can just do block equals game.serverstorage dot. Oh, there we go, right? It's right there, it's suggested. The sun. And we're not gonna just use it specifically. We can move it directly into the game, but if you wanna make copies, you don't wanna, copies of an object, you don't wanna move it and then not have it again. You wanna just do colon, and let's see if it's here, clone. It creates an object, you can't see the rest, but it clones what we just have there. And it's not necessarily gonna be the same thing. It's making another parent with all those properties. Another object with all those properties that you can just freely use and you won't affect the main one. And we're gonna do block.parent equals game.workspace. let's just do workspace this time, just so you can see that this works too. And look at that, very simple. The reason we have to set it as workspace again is because we moved it under server storage. The parent is no longer a workspace. But like this, we're gonna have the sun with the same properties, but only 2 lines as opposed to what we had before. Let's go ahead and test that out, and we put it in workspace. It's there. And if we go to the server view, because hold on, let me show you something. As a client right now, I can't see the server storage. It looks like there's nothing there, so I don't have access to that on this with this. But in the server view, you move around. This is basically the God view. You can see the server storage. It still has the sun, but guess what? We also have one in the actual game as well. Isn't that crazy? But anyways, cool. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you guys in future videos. Let me know what you guys want me to talk more about, and if you have any questions, I'll be sure to answer them in the comments, because this channel is just starting out. But if you're going more scripting after watching this, then ready, set, script.